This special Magiting video presentation is brought to you by Ayala Foundation in partnership with the National Historical Commission of the Philippines, Mitsubishi Corporation, Chicks to Go, and the Filipino Young Leaders Program. To welcome all of us to today's gathering, let us hear a few words from Mr. Tony Lambino, President of Ayala Foundation.
Greetings from the Philippines. Maraming salamat po sa inyong pagdalo. Together with the Ayala Group of Companies, Ayala Foundation stands in solidarity with the Filipino-American community as you continue to show what great things Filipino-Americans contribute to the world. Ayala Foundation is committed to building and nurturing communities where people are productive, creative, self-reliant, and proud to be Filipino. In the Philippines, we help improve lives through programs in education, sustainable livelihood, and love of country. One of our initiatives is the Maging Magiting advocacy. Maging Magiting is Filipino for be courageous or be heroic. This program recognizes the capacity of every Filipino to be a hero in both ordinary and extraordinary situations. Maging Magiting also promotes awareness of Philippine history and culture in all their richness and diversity. Filipino-Americans are our allies in advocating causes that promote the interests of Filipinos in the Philippines and the global diaspora. This is why we are honored to partner with the Filipino Young Leaders Program, or PhilPro, a network of dynamic, next-generation Phil-Am leaders who are making a difference in their respective communities. It also brings us great joy to partner with PhilPro on this Maging Magiting video production. In the next 30 minutes, you will be given a glimpse of pre-colonial Filipino life. The respected historian Ambeth Ocampo will paint a vivid picture of life before the 15th century. Then Marinela Mina, one of our curators at the Ayala Museum in Manila, will talk about pre-colonial material culture as evidence of social trade networks. Through their presentations, we hope that you will gain fresh insight into what it means to be Filipino and find a renewed sense of pride in our shared history and heritage. We are also happy to point out that the presentations are inspired by the collections of the Ayala Museum. For those who haven't had the chance, please come visit us at the museum when you are next in the Philippines, and we will show you the joy and wonder of Filipino art, history, and culture. Again, we thank all of you for joining us, and we hope that this will be just one of many collaborations that express our shared faith in the Filipino. Maraming salamat po at mabuhay tayong lahat.
What do we know about life in the Philippines before the 1500s, before written records? Going from history to prehistory, what do we know about the earliest inhabitants of these islands? Do we have evidence of human life on these islands that could date back tens or even hundreds of thousands of years? Let us listen to the eminent Filipino historian Ambeth Ocampo as he gives us a tour not just of pre-colonial Philippine history, but also of Philippine prehistory.
The Philippines is a young nation with an old history. And over the years, I have realized the Philippines is a young nation with an older prehistory. We do not see them in the Ayala Museum dioramas, but when I was a boy, when I heard the word prehistoric, I immediately associated the word with dinosaurs and cavemen. But to be clear, when we say prehistoric, we mean a time before history. And what is history and what is prehistory? Simply being that prehistory refers to the period before written records. This is why a senior colleague called my attention once when I included prehistory in my class on Philippine history, because for her, Philippine history went back to the 16th century, to the written records of Antonio Picafetta, the chronicler of the 1521 Magellan expedition, and the first published book to make reference to the Philippines, De Moluccis Insulis of 1523, that was drawn from interviews of survivors of the Magellan expedition. For this professor, anything before the 16th century was not the domain of history, it was the domain of sociology and anthropology. Since then, prehistory has been pushed back to the 9th century, not only by Chinese written records of the islands and their people, but by the discovery of the Laguna copper plate inscription, which is the oldest piece of recorded writing in the Philippines today. It is a unique document, and I hope more will be recovered in the future, because my issue with our oldest Philippine document is that it is not part of a long-lost history. Neither is it part of a long-lost epic or piece of literature. It is actually a receipt. It documents the payment of a debt in gold. Unlike the rest of the dioramas that have undergone slight revision, those in the prehistoric section continue to be updated because of new knowledge. The Banawe rice terraces, for example, that we used to be taught was thousands of years old, is much younger than we think. The dioramas depicting life in Tabon caves were made based on material and data that was gone in the 1960s. If you go to Palawan today and visit the site, you have to go by pump boat and you have to go by walking. It is quite a difficult journey, and you actually get to appreciate what Robert Fox and the archaeologists in the 1960s had to go through in order to find and excavate Tabon Cave in Palawan. The material that was excavated by Robert Fox in the early 1960s included a number of excavated stone tools, shell bracelets, and many other traces of life in prehistoric times. However, the most important discovery were fragments of human remains that included a skull cap of the so-called Tabon man that pushed prehistory back 47,000 years. And while hailed at the time as the so-called Philippine Adam, later research proved that the skull cap was from a female, not a man. Since then, other remains have been found in other excavations. Teeth and small bones of a small hominin were excavated from Callao Cave in northern Luzon that pushed back prehistory by 50,000 years. This early man is known as Homo luzonensis. The excavated foot bone of what is now known as the Callao man is older than the Tabon woman, and this pushed back prehistory by 75,000 years. The most interesting is that they found the remains of a rhinoceros. And while no human remains have been found with this excavated rhinoceros, what they found in this site in the north is that the bones of the rhinoceros contain butcher marks that were left by Philippine man before using stone tools. And now this person is called the Kalinga man. This pushes our history back 700,000 years. From the discovery of the Tabon woman in 1962 to the Callao man in 2007 and the Kalinga man in 2018, much of Philippine prehistory is being built that will help us understand where we came from, where we are, and where we are going to go. Going back to the 1960s excavations in the Palawan Cave Complex, one of the significant artifacts found in Lipun Cave was a secondary burial jar. The Manunggul jar was featured on the back of the 1,000 peso bill from 1991. And it is amusing to note that when the design was presented to the Bangko Sentral Monetary Board for approval, someone actually asked, quote, "Ano ba ang significance ng dalawang tiyonggong namamangka?" We know better today that this earthenware burial jar has two figures on a boat that references not just a maritime culture but also a belief in the afterlife. It is proof of prehistoric Philippine culture. The designs on the lid also suggest the swirling waves of the sea. Elsewhere in the museum, we have a collection of pre-colonial, pre-Spanish gold artifacts that prove the Philippines today literally had a golden age. That, contrary to popular belief, the islands and their people were already civilized before the 16th century Spanish conquest. Some artifacts in the Ayala Museum Gold Collection reference a connection with ancient India that has yet to be fully known and understood. In addition, two artifacts excavated from Butuan, now in the National Museum, a silver strip and ivory seal, both with Sanskrit, await further research. The most spectacular Philippine link to Indian culture is in the Field Museum of Chicago, a gold image found after a heavy rain in Agusan in 1918. The dioramas also reference trade with China dating back a millennium. The earliest Chinese ceramic found in the Philippines dates to the 9th century, Tang Dynasty, and a selection of excavated ceramics in another section of the Ayala Museum also traces this pre-Hispanic trade. It is unfortunate that many people are bored by ceramic displays and that many remark that once they have seen one Ming blue and white jar, they have seen them all. One item you should not miss in the Ayala Museum is the balimbing jarlet, and we have a number of these, named after the fruit that is used to describe political turncoats and opportunists today. This Chinese jarlet from the Yuan period, dating from the 13th to the 14th centuries, has only been found in archaeological sites in the Philippines and Indonesia, suggesting that these were made specifically for export to Southeast Asia. One other item that you shouldn't miss in the tradeware exhibition in the Ayala Museum is a Philippine earthenware copy of a Chinese kendi or mammiform vessel that, when set side by side, shows the influence of trade in art, culture, and the people of the Philippines. Many of us have learned in school that when the Spanish friars and conquistadors arrived in the Philippines in the late 16th century, they destroyed existing Philippine culture and replaced it with their own. There is a diorama on early Philippine printing that references Tomas Pinpin and other Filipino printers who set and published the many vocabularies or dictionaries that documented and preserved Philippine languages like Tagalog, Cebuano, Kapampangan, etc. What is not in the diorama, though, is one of two documented books from 1593, the Doctrina Christiana that documented the Baybayin or ancient Philippine syllabary. It is the Rosetta Stone that allowed us to read and translate Baybayin into Roman alphabet. In this book, we see the communication and translation from Tagalog to Spanish and from the Tagalog syllabary or Baybayin into the Western alphabet. The Ayala Museum dioramas on the prehistoric period have held a long fascination for me, simply because, as a historian, I know that I am limited by written sources. I have been challenged to look beyond by the eminent anthropologist E. Arsenio Manuel, who once introduced his graduate class on Philippine prehistory with the bold statement, quote, "Where history ends, anthropology and archaeology begins."
Ceramics, textiles, beads, and other ornaments. These are just some of the objects that we still have with us today, showing the richness and vibrancy of pre-colonial Philippine life. What are these objects telling us about our ancestors and ourselves? Marinella Mina, a curator from the Ayala Museum in the Philippines, will share with us the lifeways of our Filipino ancestors in the pre-colonial period.
For decades now, scholars have referred to the 10th to early 16th century as the protohistoric period of the archipelago because we rely on the mention of Philippine polities in historical records of other nations rather than our own. Chinese and European chronicles tell us that as early as the 9th century, the early Filipinos were adventurous, enterprising, and shrewd navigators that engaged in trade with their neighbors. Our ancestors sailed over miles of open seas to important port cities in mainland Asia, bringing gold, iron, pearls, and forest products. While there are limited accounts of what these traders acquired, large quantities of Chinese and Southeast Asian trade ceramics found throughout the Philippine archipelago serve as evidence of their active participation in regional and inter-island trade. Archaeological and linguistic evidence show that as early Southeast Asian communities developed nautical expertise, it allowed them to create an extensive maritime network. As early as 300 BC, this vast web stretched from Indonesia to India, evidenced by the distribution of bronze drums from North Vietnam, Indonesian spices, and Indian stone and glass beads found throughout the region. Data from shipwrecks indicates that before the first millennium AD, Southeast Asian and Arab ships dominated Asian waters, while Chinese ships emerged in the 12th century. The shared Southeast Asian boat-building tradition using outriggers and lashed lug construction also points to a common seafaring ancestry that connected the inhabitants of the Philippine archipelago to this expansive maritime network. Before the arrival of Ferdinand Magellan in 1521, Tom Perez already wrote of the presence of traders from Luzon in Malacca, who were part of a large enough community of traders that they had their own representative, or tomongo, in the port city. Examining ethnographic materials, in particular textiles from various indigenous groups of the Philippines, also reveal other manifestations of the connections our people have always had with the environment. While some weaving techniques, such as ikat, appear to be shared from north to southern Philippines among non-Christianized cultural groups, the preference for material or fibers used directly reflect what resources communities had: abaca among the Lumad groups of Mindanao, cotton in the Cordilleras of Luzon, and silk among the Islamic cultures that traded directly with China in the Sulu Sea. Other embellishments used in traditional attire, such as hand-cut mother-of-pearl sequins, large shell discs, glass, stone trade beads from other continents, and even modern denim material also reveal the trade connections between coastal and upland communities. As Miguel de Loarca wrote in his 1582 description of Panay Island, "Those of the mountains cannot live without the fish and salt and other things, and jars and plates which come from other parts. Nor can those on the coast live without the rice and cotton which the mountaineers have." In the early 16th century, this archipelago of more than 7,000 islands was named the Philippines and subjected to centuries of Spanish colonial rule. When Ferdinand Magellan and the Spanish fleets first landed on the archipelago in 1521, they were met by culturally and politically distinct communities that coexisted in volatile relationships of competitive codependency. These complex relationships between coastal, riverine, and upland polities within and between islands that facilitated movement and distribution of goods and sharing of techniques and aesthetics throughout the archipelago also aided the Spanish occupation, as they balanced hostility and cooperation for the exchange of goods and political support. Even today, power and social rank are established through one's ability to obtain and redistribute prized commodities, whether basic necessities, manpower and security, or rare and unique objects. In early Philippine societies, ruling elites boasted heirloom wealth called bahandi, which included goldwork, bronze gongs, and imported tradeware ceramics. Whether acquired through raids, the sale of local produce, or the control of trade, gifting of heirloom wealth helped elites establish and retain alliances with other ruling elites. Bahandi was also required for the status display during feasts that illustrated the ability of elite individuals to provide abundantly for their followers and further strengthened their social standing. When Humabon, a chief of Cebu, welcomed Magellan and his men in 1521, two large porcelain dishes were brought out, one full of rice and the other of pork with its gravy. In Southeast Asian societies, the act of eating together was also a means of securing status. Therefore, the sizes and shapes of imported ceramic vessels owned by the household also served as indicators of power and wealth, signifying the household's size, status, and ability to secure even higher status through public feasting. Stoneware jars, for example, were important vessels used in the fermentation of alcoholic beverages that were shared in almost all social and ritual activities in Philippine communities, according to many historical and ethnographic accounts. Francisco Alsina wrote in 1668 how central liquor was and played an important role in community affairs. He wrote, "Another experience we have as ministers who lived amongst these Visayans is that whenever projects are presented, either as public works or by mandates of the king or his officials, or whatever other works, They hold consultations among themselves how all of that must be executed, its possibility, quickness, equal distribution, and other circumstances. If they come together without drinking or a little wine with which to uplift their spirits, they speak little, reason out things in an ill manner, procrastinate, and plan badly. But if they drink something, he who makes the proposals does it eloquently. Those who raise objections do it discreetly. Those who arrange it all do it with care and with all fairness. Because of the cost of acquiring these trade jars, especially in upland communities, they were also important goods included in the negotiation of bride price. As late as the early 20th century, ethnographic accounts documented that some Tinggian families in northern Luzon required suitors to fill a table of trade jars as part of the tribute. At the beginning of the Spanish colonial period, large stoneware jars, also called dragon jars, were documented to have cost as much as 1 thyle or just under 38 grams of gold in the Visayas. Pre-colonial gold artifacts also illustrate the material wealth and cultural affinities our ancestors had. Ornaments hint at technological and stylistic similarities with Ok Eo, the ancient capital of Funan, which is now part of modern Vietnam. Other objects hint at Hindu imagery and others still Chinese. Without a scientifically excavated context, however, it is difficult to tell which objects were produced and which were acquired by our ancestors. Excavated burial sites with clippings from gold death masks and orifice covers and diadems, however, prove that gold working was also done on-site by pre-colonial Filipinos during the interment process. Earthenware and tradeware ceramics were used as gifts for the spirits and provisions for the next life, and proliferated in pre-colonial burial sites, either interred with the deceased or left atop the grave. One of the major archaeological undertakings in the Philippines in the mid-20th century was the excavation of more than 200 pre-colonial burials in Santa Ana in Manila, where more than 60% contained tradeware ceramics. The excavation revealed preferential treatment in the goods interred with children compared to adults, with higher quality and quantity of ceramics given to the former. This does not necessarily imply that children were wealthier than adults, but may indicate the view that those who died young may need more for their journey to the afterlife. This reveals to us how our ancestors also valued and celebrated their loved ones. 10th to 13th century Philippine gold interred in burial sites are also important markers of this practice of care and reverence for the deceased. Among living cultures in the Cordilleras, the use of death blankets, highly valuable and rare textile pieces, also flaunt status and respect. Much of our pre-colonial past is also, in a sense, a prehistoric past, as there are few written records from Philippine polities prior to Spanish occupation. However, there are many ways and fields of study by which we can gain some understanding of our past, but we should also acknowledge that what each method of approach reveals to us will almost always be a limited view, providing insight to a particular population, locality, time period, practice, and so on. Our understanding of our pre-colonial identity is continuously unfolding and shaped by the research of scholars in various fields of history, archaeology, anthropology, and material culture, and to a degree, parallels the continuous formation of our culture and national identity today.
This special Magiting video presentation is brought to you by Ayala Foundation in partnership with the Filipino Young Leaders Program. It is supported by the National Historical Commission of the Philippines, Mitsubishi Corporation. The videos you just saw were inspired by collections currently on display at the Ayala Museum in the Philippines. If you are looking for more reasons to rekindle and sustain your faith in the Filipino, we invite you to visit us at the Ayala Museum in Makati City, at the heart of Metro Manila's Central Business District. You can also view a great wealth of digital materials on the Philippines by visiting our official websites and social media accounts.